This is the story of Stanley Newman. Stanley, you were in Florida right at the beginning of the pandemic, and now you're in Washington, D.C. You've been involved in economic growth for much of your life. Let's talk a little bit about how is the pandemic affecting you personally?
Well, it's interesting. It's on two levels. Economically, it's affecting me only on paper. In other words, like everybody else who has investments, 401ks or investments in the stock market, everything else. I mean, we definitely have seen, getting hurt by that. I mean, that's true with anybody who has these assets. But those assets, as I like to say, you can't take your stock certificates to the grocery store and get a quart of milk. So in a sense, those assets, unless you're in a situation where you really need to cash in the assets and you need the income from the assets, if you don't, they don't really affect your lifestyle very much. I mean, you feel unhappy about it. You particularly at my age, you feel unhappy about the inheritance that you're going to give your children. But basically, from an economic point of view, in terms of course, we're not going anywhere anyway, so we're not spending a lot of money. But from an economic point of view, it hasn't affected us. Now, I'm very sympathetic to the idea that it's affected millions and millions of people. I mean, 21 million, 22 million people are out of work. So I don't want to be arrogant about it and say, well, it didn't affect me, but it's affecting many, 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 many millions of people. But from a personal point of view, that's not really where the impact is. The impact is much more on another point of view. I mean, one of the probably most unhappy impact for myself and my wife is the inability to see. Well, it's not to see, but to be with our children and grandchildren. We're lucky because our grandchildren and children live 15 minutes away from us. So we're used to having a lot of contact with our family. I mean, a couple of times a week. We're in and out of people's houses. They live very close, but we're not allowed to do that anymore because they're more worried about giving it to us than they're worried about us giving it to them. But anyway, we've been barred. Katie was barred from the kitchen door, so we do see them in a distant, and they're able to come in to our garden and wave, and we're able to stand 6 to 8 feet from each other and shout at each other. But and for the Passover, we did Zoom Passovers. The wine didn't taste quite as good on the Zoom, but we were able to Zoom. It was fun. We had quite a lot of people, but we did 2 Zoom Passovers. So, but it's that's the most. I mean, again, I'm sympathetic to people who have much worse situations than that. And then there's also just the I don't know how to put it, but you got to be careful you don't get depressed. It's easy to get depressed. That's what I find. I try not to get into a funk by keeping relatively busy. I mean, I take courses, some with Ollie, by the way, on on the Zoom, and I read, and the other thing is that we're extremely lucky because we have each other. So I really, really, really feel sorry for people who are not in the life situation where they're living with somebody, where they're alone. I think would be extremely difficult. So we're with each other, and we have enough of a house so that we don't have to be in the same room 24 hours a day, which is helpful, And my wife is still doing therapy on the internet with patients, so there's a distance, and so we keep busy. The idea really is to keep busy. It's important, and it's also, and I tell people this who ask, it's important to go through routines. Like, it's important to get up in the morning. It's important to get dressed. It's important to take a shower. It's important not to lie around in your pajamas 24 hours a day. That's enough to make anybody. It's important to sort of pretend that you're operating in the world. So I think more But I don't know how long this can last. I mean, how long can you be locked up? That's not really the probably proper statement. I mean, how long can you be confined? Let's put it that way, to your house. I mean, we could take a walk. Occasionally, we can even take a drive. But how long can you, so kind of not be able to, connect with other people in a more usual way? I don't know, but so far we're here. So
We'll
that's
probably find out. You and I have been in the working with low-income people in one way or another for
oh
a
yes.
long time. And I'm wondering whether you think that this is hitting the low-income people harder than it is others.
Yeah. Oh, much. And make it short, there's three reasons. One is because the living conditions, they tend not to live in very spacious surroundings, so that it's hard for them. It's hard to keep the distance. And the other is because of their work situation. Most or many low-income people can't afford to stay home, so that means they have to go to work. And going to work often means taking public transportation, where it's difficult to do any kind of real distancing. And then their workplace doesn't necessarily provide enough space for 6 to 8 feet, between people. And then there's the other reason, which is a function of the inequality of access to healthcare, where there are more people in the low income brackets have pre-existing conditions than more affluent people, because their access to healthcare isn't the same over the years, so that they're both vulnerable in getting it, and they're vulnerable in having it much more severe because of pre-existing conditions. So it's like a double or triple whammy on low-income people, which has a lot to do with the way our society has been structured in terms of racism and how we treat low-income people in the society.
What do you think about the economy and how soon that can come back and how it could come back? You've worked on economic development for a good part of your life. Tell us what you feel about that,
Well,
other
it's
than
all
the stock market. I mean, we know.
it's all a function of the virus. I mean, the president can make an edict, or even the governors can make an edict. Everybody should go back to work, and everybody should go back to the theaters, and everybody should be. But unless they have to, and that's a whole different idea. I mean, if they have to work, particularly if employers feel that they have to have income and they have to work, that's a whole different story. But on the disposable income side, let's put it that way, which our society economically is very much dependent on the spending of a disposable income. I think it's going to be difficult, because unless people feel comfortable and safe in going to stores, or going to theaters, or even going to the supermarket, they're not going to do it. I mean, they're going to do it very sparingly, no matter what the government says. And that's a function of, basically, it's a function of getting a vaccine. It's really what it is. I mean, I don't think, the virus may dissipate to a certain degree, but then there's Dr. Fauci says that there's a good possibility that there'll be a resurgence in ebb and flow. What happens with the flu, it ebb and flows. I think people will be very wary of going to places where there are crowds, and that's where the money is spent. So I think the economy is going to have a very hard time in getting back. I mean, I'm not saying that it won't sputter along and do better than it's doing now, which isn't very hard because it's doing so miserably. But it's going to be hard to get the economy to really get back to anywhere near normal, unless you beat the virus with it. And that, I think, is a function of a vaccine.
And that is a function of time, because
Yep.
if it's going to take you 12 to 18 months to get a vaccine and get it tested, and of course, just the lack of testing. So we don't really know what the numbers are at this point, because even though we're in the middle of it, there's not much testing going on.
Well, testing is very important, but it's not the only answer, because Unfortunately, as I understand it, you can be tested negatively and then get the vaccine, then get the virus the next day. I mean, testing doesn't prevent you from getting it. It just says that sort of like an electrocardiogram. It says that it's a snapshot in time. That's really what it is. So if you get tested today and you're clear, you don't have the virus, that doesn't mean you can't get it next week or you can't get it tomorrow. So I mean, it's certainly important. And what's important about testing is testing people who are positive, not people who are negative. Because if you test people who are positive, then you can quarantine them, and then, to the best you can, which is complicated in our society, to try to trace their contacts. Well, some people that's easy, and some people it's very difficult. I mean, like I was on a plane coming back from Tampa with maybe 100 people of all over probably the world, not just the United States, and then trying to get back to those people and trying to test those people to see where they had it is probably virtually impossible. So even the idea of contacts, you can do some of it, and in certain situations you may be able to do better than others. But really, the testing is really to test people positive, not to test people negative, and then get them to quarantine and the best you can to get them, the people they were in contact with, get them tested to see if they're positive. That's for 325 million people. That's not easy.
And that's even harder to do within a household. So if one person gets it, even though the other person may not have it, their spouse or their kids may not have it, it's very likely that they may end up with it.
Right. That's right. So that's the question: how often do you test? But the testing is important because it will identify people who already have it, and those people can be put in a situation where they can't anymore spread it, and that's important. So testing is important, but it's not the solution. It's not that everybody tested in the United States, people would be comfortable in going out and mingling with a crowd, because it doesn't protect you from getting it in that sense. It reduces the possibility, though.
What kind of changes do you think will come about as a result of this? And I think, for instance, about you going to Florida every winter, and yet you have to probably get on a plane to go there.
Yeah.
You probably could do train, I don't know. But question is this, do you think this is going to change the way we live and the way we react?
Well, again, that depends upon whether or not people feel they're immune. I mean, after all, we got the flu, and if you get a flu shot, that doesn't prevent you from getting the flu, although it's pretty effective. And if you do get the flu, it's usually milder than if you didn't get the flu shot. But people who get the flu, let's take the flu, for example, which is also a deadly virus, but not as contagious or as deadly as this one. So people get the flu shot, and they're comfortable when they have a flu shot in going into situations where people might have the flu, like just what you said, like flying or going. Driving doesn't help you much because you got to, at least depending on where you live. Where we live, can't do it all in one day. So you got to go to a hotel or motel, which is probably more dangerous than going on a plane. But anyway, but people do it. I mean, people go all over the place. So if you got a virus vaccine, which people have enough confidence in that it immunizes them best as possible against the virus, then I think people will then resume going back to what they were doing. The question isn't so much that. The question is, will it change our perception of how the society distributes income and distributes access to housing and healthcare? And that's a whole different issue. But it might, again, it depends upon, first of all, it depends upon how many people are really affected, ultimately. It also depends upon how the politics of the country shapes out, whether we get politicians who really care, or we get politicians who don't. Or we get some politicians who want to block everybody else. So, I mean, the politics of the country really does matter. I mean, that's another thing that I think will come out of this. People who realize that government really matters, and politicians really matter, and who you vote for really matters. I mean, look what happened in Wisconsin. I mean, I think Wisconsin is a really interesting case. where people, took a risk. People who voted in Wisconsin took a risk, and they came out in pretty large numbers, and they voted for people they thought would actually turn things around. So if that's going to be, if Wisconsin hopefully is called a bellwether of what's going to happen, then we have some hope, and we'll know. But if we don't, then we're going to be in a lot of serious trouble. I think though that the perceptions of government might really change, because now people say, that people are relying on government to an extent that they never relied on government before. I mean, even the vaccine, for example, is going to rely on government. I mean, who's going to distribute the vaccine? It's not going to be private industry that distributes the vaccine. They may distribute it to the government or to governmental entities, but we're going to need a vast effort to get 300 million people vaccinated. I mean, that's a big, big effort. So I think government is to change. Hopefully, people will see government not the way Reagan saw it, where government wasn't the solution, or was the problem. I think that's really going to change, even amongst some people. Of course, will never change, but even amongst people who were more on the conservative side might very well rethink the role of government in our society. Hopefully, that's going to be one of the good things that come out.
Well, thank you so much, Stanley. People can hear your whole story if they go to trailblazersimpact.com and go to Community Trailblazers, because you are one of the people that are on the oral history channel on affordable housing and community development. So thank you so much for participating.
Well, thank you, Nan, for giving me the opportunity. As you can see, I enjoyed it.